Yes, could you ask Mr. Walton to come back, please? Thank you. Mr. Walton, ready to carry on?
Yes, sir.
Good, thank you.
Mr. Walton, thank you for coming back to us. Can I go back to the ORD document that we looked at before the lunch break, which is LFB quadruple 03116, which is also at tab 13 of our, our bundle. And I'd like you to go to page 7 in that, please. And this is what you find under plans and images. It's an aerial photograph of the tower itself and a small part of its surrounding area. Mm-hmm. Is that what you would normally expect to find on this document in terms of detailed plans and images?
It's not unusual to have a site image so that you could consider that when planning where aerial appliances, pumps, etc. might be positioned. However, I wouldn't expect that to be the only image that was there. I would expect there to be some detail of the floor plans.
Would an incident commander, on his way to an incident, want rather more than an aerial shot of the premises that you see there?
To be honest, in that circumstance, that's probably the most useful image en route, because you can look at where you're going to consider your initial appliance positioning, if it's somewhere you're not familiar with completely. But once you're dealing with an incident, I would say that site plans, as in a floor plan, would be more useful.
Well, I was going to say, surely even the most general of floor plans would be more useful than an aerial shot like that to an incident commander en route. No?
Well, once you're committing crews, you would like to know what you're committing them into, yes.
No, I'm going to press you a bit. Surely an incident commander en route to an incident at a tower block would want rather more by way of plans, detailed plans, than an aerial shot like that, such as detailed plans of where the hydrants were, detailed plans of where the dry rising main outlets were, detailed plans of where the smoke vent system was, matters of that nature.
If I received that as an odd entry, I'd send it back and ask for more detailed plans to be put on the system. Right.
Now, can I ask you to be shown, please, IWS 50169, which is an email. No.
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 Not that.
Not that. We'll come to it later. I don't want to spend time looking for a document on my feet. Can I then ask you to turn to page 21 of your statement, please? And you describe at page 21 three-quarters of the way down the page how you say you looked at the building and you saw that at least half of it on one side had visible flames, and I thought, I know what's happening here. It's got balconies. They've got a load of crap on the balconies. And we've seen that before. Mm-hmm. I want to ask you about the visible flames very specifically. My question is, at that point, you were running, as you say, down the road. Which elevation of the building were you looking at?
As it became determined later, it was the east face. It was the original face that was on fire.
The original face of the fire. Did you see where the fire had penetrated into flats at that point?
I didn't believe that the fire had got back into the building.
No. My question is, did you see?
I didn't see any indication that the fire had got back into the building.
Right. Now, a watch manager called Norman Harrison attended this incident. I don't know if you know Norman Harrison.
I don't know Norman
You don't.
Harrison.
He gave evidence yesterday. He arrived at 1:50 and reached the base of the tower shortly after that. And his evidence in his statement is, and I'll put it to you, he said, as we got there, I noticed the tower itself from the initial side that I looked at from behind the school. I could now see that it wasn't just the cladding. The fire was coming from inside the flats, from the 4th floor to all the way to the top. Now, that was his vantage point and his line of sight. Mm-hmm. If he could see the flats were on fire, could you not also see that flats were on fire?
I didn't see any flats on fire from inside the building.
Now, did you see at that point an aerial in the process of getting into position?
As I was speaking to Mike Dowden as part of our handover process, there was a turntable ladder positioned at the southeast corner of the building, slightly on an angle, and it was being raised off the bed and trained towards the building. And as we were talking, then a firefighting monitor came into operation, so it started to put water onto the side of the building.
How high up could that, or did that turntable ladder reach in terms of the reach of the water jet?
My recollection is they went to maximum elevation, which from my knowledge would be about 10 floors, and they played water against the columns of fire as it was elevated, and then they swept back down from the maximum height they could reach. And as the monitor jet hit the flame, it seemed to have an effect on it and put it out, and then as it moved away, it came back.
Right.
So the area where the water was hitting seemed to be being extinguished, but as soon as the water wasn't being played on that area, it reignited.
And you saw that, did you?
I saw that. I've got a recollection.
So what did you think was burning when you saw that happen?
I had not got a clue what was burning. As I've said earlier, I had a belief that cladding would not be able to be on the side of a building that burnt. So it looked like it was the cladding, but I didn't know what it was that was actually burning. I just didn't know.
You say that you believe that, as you just told us, that that the cladding wouldn't be on the side of the building. Just to get back to that, was your belief, as at the night of the Grenfell Tower fire, that cladding wasn't allowed on the side of buildings?
No,
or?
I believed you could clad a building, but I didn't believe you could clad it in flammable material.
Right, so do we take it from that your impression, opinion, thought was that combustible cladding was not permitted?
Yes.
Right. Even a limited combustibility cladding not permitted?
That was my belief.
Where did you get that belief from?
I'd spent time as a fire safety inspecting officer. I'd had to look at regulation as part of that process.
Yeah.
I knew that, again, this is looking back, but my belief was that flammable cladding was not allowed on the side of a building over a certain height. It could be allowed on lower level buildings because it obviously wouldn't have as much a potential of an effect. But once it got over a certain height, and I couldn't tell you what level that was, but it would be any high-rise building, it wasn't allowed to be applied in that way. That was my belief, my understanding.
Have you ever had any training on approved document B?
I have been trained as a fire safety inspecting officer at Walton in the Marsh, the National Fire Service College. I completed modules A, B and C and FSAO D8. And what that means is I was trained in applying fire safety to buildings of public assembly through to residential accommodation, and I had an introduction into understanding fire engineered solutions in buildings.
An introduction. My question, I'll repeat it. Did you have any training on approved document B?
On the majority of those courses, approved document B was referred to, and I have had training on referring to approved document B and applying it to building plans, etc.
Right. Can you give a date when you were trained or last trained on approved document B prior to the Grenfell Tower fire?
Probably about 2004, 2005,
right.
When I was doing those courses.
So is it right then that, as at the night of the fire, when you saw it alight, your belief that it couldn't be clad in combustible cladding was based on your training on approved document B, which went back to 2004 fire?
Yes.
Not any more recent, up-to-date versions of approved document B?
No.
Right. Now, just going back to the question of a turntable ladder, did you know that it couldn't reach the fire or a fire at the top of this building?
I have been a turntable ladder operator. I've also been an ALP operator in my career, and I was aware of the capabilities of the appliance, and I knew that it was a 30-metre reach,
Right.
and that in effect the 10th floor was probably about the effective range of that appliance.
So did you have any thoughts when you saw that as to how you were going, or how the LFB was going to fight the fire externally above the reach of the turntable ladder?
As part of the handover with Mike Dowden, we considered what our options were. As I've stated earlier, my focus would have been on getting crews to the inside of the building and preventing the fire getting back in, i.e. not fighting the external fire but trying to stop its effects. And Mike mentioned that he'd tasked a fire rescue unit crew to go to the roof of the tower and investigate if we could improvise any jets from above down the face of the building between the cladding and the building to try and extinguish that fire. And that is completely outside of anything any of us had ever considered before.
Right, so is the answer to my question as to whether you thought you were going to be able to fight the fire from the exterior only by this roof method that Mike Dowden came up with?
We had nothing in our toolbox to fight that fire. We were improvising.
Okay. Now, let's go to your taking over from Mike Dowden. When you saw Mike Dowden wearing the incident tabard, did you think he was still in charge?
The tabard indicated that. The first question on my approach was, are you still in charge?
Right.
The reason I asked that was sometimes an incident commander is relieved of command and forgets to take the tabard off. And I knew there was other station managers because I'd heard, or another station manager on the incident ground because I'd heard the call sign, and I was just confirming that he hadn't been spoken to by that officer.
Yeah. What was your initial impression as to how Mike Dowden was coping as incident commander?
He was agitated, but he was in control. Yeah. I was, as I approached, he was in what I wouldn't have said was the most ideal command position. And I was thinking, I'm going to have to pull you back to a position where you've got a better overview. But as I was walking up, he did that. So he was tasking individuals at the tower where that tasking would be really effective. And then he brought himself away from that melee of people to where he could, in effect, review what he'd just initiated. And I joined him in that position. But what he was doing, which made me think he was agitated, was he continually changed that position. He kept moving between points. So I was walking with him as we were doing the handover, and I eventually made him stand still.
Right.
And that was when we were on the grass mound at the side of the tower.
Grass mound to the east of the tower?
Yeah.
Right. Now, we can go to the detail of the policy if you'd find it helpful, but would you agree with me that the principal obligation of an officer taking incident command is to be given all relevant information by the incident commander who's being relieved?
Yeah, we have to achieve an effective briefing of the officer coming on.
Yeah, all relevant information.
Yeah.
Yeah. And would you also agree that the incoming incident commander should also be made fully aware of all the identified hazards on the fireground and those people who are at risk of from those hazards?
That's part of our process, yes.
Right. Now let's look and see what happened. If you go to page 23 of your statement, you say just above halfway down at the last paragraph break there, I said I will be taking this off you, so I want a really quick and dirty handover. So did you say that?
Yeah, almost to the word, and I think it then followed with, I don't want you to go anywhere else. I'm going to keep you with me while we finish the handover.
Right. And you say he started to talk. So I said, this is what I know. And I told him what I'd heard over the radio, what I'd seen, and I told him a lot of information. And then I asked, what else do I need to know? And he started talking. Why was it that way round? Why did you start telling him what you knew rather than waiting for him to tell you what he knew?
Normally, and I mean normally, that is something you do. You deliberately let the officer in charge speak, and you let them frame their overview, and then you ask clarifying questions to get any additional information that they haven't already covered. I could see what this looked like it was. I needed to get to the point of knowing what it was and what we were doing. So to speed that process up, I thought it was quicker for me to tell him what I had already gathered and for him to add to that, rather than for me to probably hear 50% or 80% that I already knew to get to the 20% I needed.
Right. Now, you say a little bit lower down, you can't remember the detail. We spoke about life. I said, I know you've got multiple FSGs. Did you go into any further detail and tell him that those FSGs involved smoke or fire entry from higher floors?
No. Prior to that, I'd asked Mike, are you still in charge? And he'd said yes. I said, haven't you seen another station manager? I know there's other station managers here. He said, I have, but that station manager had a quick overview from me and they took the FSGs. So I knew there was a station manager who was dealing with the FSG information. So it would have wasted time me going over that information because Mike didn't have it. It was with somebody else. Right. So my process was to take over from Mike Dowden, and then I would find the station manager who was conducting FSGs, and I would do a similar information gathering exchange with that officer.
Did you ask Mike Dowden what the conditions were like inside the building?
It was part of my questioning. I believe the way I phrased it was, I think I've used the phrase before today, I want to know, are the FSGs trapped or do they think they're trapped? And what that means is I want BA crews to have gone to the locations and made an assessment of the conditions. Because if it is just that there's smoke that isn't normal to a member of the public and it's not actually trapping them, the crew would give reassurance and we would deal with it after we'd put the fire out. If it was that the conditions that they found meant they made that call that this is untenable, that's when they're trapped. And that's where we would have then directed our operations to the rescue. So asking, are they trapped or do they think they're trapped, is in effect, what conditions are those people in?
Given what you had heard over the radio on the way, en route to the tower, did you not think, given the volume of calls coming from around the tower, and particularly on high floors, that it was more likely than not that they actually were trapped rather than simply thinking they were trapped?
Yes, the fact that everybody would need rescue was in my mind, yes. In my thinking. The fact that nobody could escape was in my thinking.
Yeah, so given that everybody would need rescue, as you just said, having heard what you'd heard, was it not then necessary as the next step to ascertain from Mike Dowden what the smoke and heat and fire conditions were like in the lobbies and in the stair? That's
what I'd asked for.
Right.
Are they trapped or do they think they're trapped?
Well, that's not quite the same question.
It is in our parlance. We understand that. If an officer asks you, I want BA to the FSGs, I want to know if they're trapped or they think they're trapped. And the next part of the sentence is, if they are trapped, what do we need to get them out? And that is my standard phrase that as I've said, I've not dealt with an FSG incident before, but I've dealt with them on every tactical exercise I've ever had. And I was drawing on those exercises. I believe every exercise I've ever had has involved high-rise and FSG. And it is my normal process. And it is, what do we need to get them out if they're trapped? Right,
okay. Just building on that, if I can just then take you to your contemporaneous notes at page 3, and we're looking at MET 000, quadruple zero 5714, which is the A4 manuscript notes. I'd like you to go, please, to page 3 of that. And halfway down, you say, this is part of the discussion, I said you have multiple FSG, fire survival guidance calls taking place. What other life risk are you aware of? He said, this is Mike Dowden, he said there could be the whole block. I'm just pausing there, I'm going to come on to the rest of that in a minute, but when he said there could be the whole block, did you then have thoughts in your own head about whether a full or partial evacuation plan needed to be looked at?
In my head, if they are exposed in that way, evacuation is not possible. for them to be trapped, escape isn't possible. They would die if they came out of their flats. We had to rescue them.
Right.
That's where my thought process went.
Okay. You then go on to say, you asked about whether the incident involved just an external fire or whether it was also breaching multiple floors. You say that?
Yeah, that's to try and, again...
But can I just ask my question?
Okay,
So I just wanted
fine.
to show you what you said, then I'll ask a question.
Yep.
Then my question is, why did you need to ask him that question, given the content of the FSG calls you had heard en route?
Because I hadn't heard anything. Bearing in mind I wasn't listening to the detail of the FSGs. There was that many of them. I started off trying to remember detail. I then knew I wouldn't be able to retain the amount of information I was receiving, so I just concentrated on knowing there was a lot of FSGs. So none of the information I'd heard on the radio indicated that fire was in the flats with the individuals. I hadn't heard that said. All I'd heard was that people were saying they were trapped by smoke, in effect. So the first question was, are they trapped by smoke? The second question was, were they threatened by fire? That's what that's asking. Because when I know that, if I know where people are trapped by smoke and if I know where people are threatened by fire, that's going to determine how I prioritise the response. Am I going to prioritise fighting the fire and stopping it reaching those people? Or am I going to prioritise, because if the fire's not getting back in, am I going to prioritise stopping it getting back in and getting those people out that are trapped by smoke?
What about smoke in the flats? Given the content, or given at least the volume of FSG calls from people calling for fire survival guidance, did it not occur to you that many of them, at least, would be suffering the effects, at least of smoke within their compartments, even though fire might not have come back in?
They shouldn't have been. The principle of that building was that the fire and the effects of the fire would be contained in the original compartment. Obviously, when we fight a fire with our procedures, we breach the fire door onto the staircase with our firefighting hose. So it could be that they've seen smoke on the staircase from that and they've assumed they're trapped. There was no indication that people were saying there was smoke and fire in their flats. So I had to determine, did they think they were trapped or were they trapped?
Did you ask Mike Dowden whether, to the best of his knowledge, there were calls coming in which indicated that there was smoke or fire in the flats?
No. I knew an FSG officer was holding that detail and I intended to liaise with them afterwards.
Because you asked him what the life risk was and he said there could be the whole block. Did you assume at that point that he just meant that the fire was on the outside, people might or might not be trapped by smoke or fire in the exit route, but their flats themselves were clean of smoke or heat or fire?
That was part of my thinking, is that I hoped that the compartmentation had held up enough that people who were in their flats were in clean air, that maybe the lobbies were compromised because that's what the FSGs were indicating, and that if we got on top of the fire, those people would be able to remain to the point that we either rescued them or cleared the smoke from the lobby so rescue wasn't required. Every flat that I've ever fought a fire in, my experience is that people in the immediate vicinity can't get out of their flat because there's smoke on the lobby or in the staircase because of our firefighting operations. Right. But if they stay in their flat, we put the fire out, we clear the lobbies, we clear the staircases, and there's no consequence. And so I was expecting the building, hoping the building was going to react in that way, and that there had been smoke spread, because why else would we be getting so many FSGs? But the fire was the main reason for that smoke spread. I was maybe considering, and this is a maybe, that it was getting back in through open windows and it was getting into areas that way. I didn't know how we could have smoke on so many different levels in one incident so early. I just had no way of of understanding that.
But if you were maybe considering, as you say, the smoke was getting in through open windows, that would surely indicate, wouldn't it, that apartments were affected by smoke, and therefore the occupants were suffering the effects of smoke inside their flats.
It's a consideration. As I'm standing there, as a level 2 officer, without going into a long answer, which obviously I'm trying to avoid, but part of my job as a level 2 officer is to test the assumptions which have been made by the initial commander, because I've got the luxury of arriving a bit later, and there's possibly more information now than there was when they made their initial decisions. So I check what information they knew, I check what decisions they've made, I'd look for corroboration, and I try and make sure that any assumptions that have been made are valid, that the assumptions they've made at that time stand up a bit more scrutiny. So although it's one of the things it could have been, it's one of the things I had to consider. And I have to go through the whole range as I'm taking over in a very, very short space of time.
Sure. You say later in your statement, and it's page 30, and we can look at it if we need to, but you say if it was getting in, that's fire, we were in big trouble.
Yeah.
So would it be right to say that fire penetration from the exterior to interiors of flats was a game changer for you at that time? Right. Given that was the case, and given the scale of what you could see in front of you, did you not think to explore the risks of that happening, or whether that was happening with Mike Dowden?
I had a good idea what the risks were if that fire was getting back in on multiple levels.
Yeah, but did you not
I didn't need to explore it with Mike Dowden. I was going to be taking charge. I would be the officer in charge of that incident as soon as we'd finished our brief handover. Right. And if I had two main objectives that I wanted from Mike Dowden. Were the people trapped, or did they think they were trapped? I.e., what are the conditions they're experiencing? And was the fire getting back in? If either of those was a positive answer, if people were trapped or if the fire was getting back in, I was dealing with a major incident and I was ready to declare that and take it there. Right. And that would have meant that it would have been a massive scale up, because as far as I was concerned, if either of those came back as an affirmative, everybody in that building needed rescue. And I would have to deal with that.
Yeah. So, in answer to your question, Mike said, and this is on page 3 of your contemporaneous notes, and I'll read it to you. He said he had BA committed to try and determine this. Mm-hmm. Now, that's your recollection of what he said. Yep. Was it not essential to you at that moment, given that you didn't know trapped or not trapped, penetration or no penetration, instantaneously or as fast as you could to find out the answers to those questions, rather than just leaving it to BA Wares to determine it? Normally,
you would have radioed to the officer in charge of the Bridgehead and probably conveyed that as you were doing the handover. The radios were ineffectual. There was that much traffic of different firefighters talking to each other, confirming that water was in, confirming that hoses were in place, that they'd made access to whatever. There was that much traffic, you couldn't get in on the radios. You couldn't get a message through. So what I said to Mike Dowden was, as soon as we finish this briefing, I'm going to send you to the Bridgehead and I want that information. So it was the first task I was going to give Mike Dowden. The first task I did give Mike Dowden, once we'd done the handover, was go to the Bridgehead and get me that information. Because we had to rely on physically people moving from one location to another to get information to transfer from one location to another.
When you had that handover with Mike Dowden, how close to the entrance to the tower were you standing?
We were on the grass mound at the east face of the tower, probably about 15 metres, maybe 20 metres from the back of the turntable ladder, and the ALP was positioning to our right as we were having the handover. The aerial ladder platform was positioning to our right as we had the handover.
Did you have a clear view of the main entrance to the tower?
I couldn't see the main entrance. My view of the front face of the tower was over the turntable ladder. I could see there was an appliance or maybe two appliances parked in front of the tower, and I could see through the side glazing the foyer and crews moving up the staircase in there. I couldn't see the front door.
Okay, you could see into the,
I could see into
the stairs.
The lobby. I could see into the atrium.
And the atrium. Yeah. Did you see any occupants of the tower coming down?
Yes, I've got recollection of seeing members of the public walking out of the tower in the early stages.
Right. Did you see whether they were suffering from the effects of smoke inhalation?
I couldn't see that from where I was. It would have been my suspicion. I know that Mike informed me that the original occupants of the flat had slight smoke inhalation, and it was part of my briefing to the LAS later that that's where the occupants are. They've taken in some smoke.
What sort of numbers could you see in terms of occupants evacuating?
It wasn't large numbers. It was probably ones and twos, a few minutes or 30 seconds, a minute, and then maybe another one or two.
Right. You say you had a suspicion that they were suffering the effects of smoke inhalation. Would that not have told you that compartmentation had been breached and that smoke was getting right up the building?
No, it was a suspicion. I don't know where these people have come from. I don't know if they've come from below the fire, above the fire. I don't know where they're from. So I just saw members of the public leaving the building, and because of what the fire looked like, and I was trying to determine was it what it looked like, my suspicion was that there's probably a lot of smoke spread in this building. There's a good chance people coming out will be affected by smoke. It was an assumption.
Did you think to act on that suspicion, go around the front and talk to them about where the smoke was?
I've got officers on the fire ground that are doing different jobs. I don't do every job on the incident ground. I was taking over command. I was in the process of getting the command briefing. There were officers, capable officers, at the front of the building. They're not going to let somebody suffering smoke inhalation walk past them. They're going to take action.
Right, but you say you had a suspicion. My question really was whether you acted on that suspicion, and either you didn't do it yourself. Did you ask somebody to talk to the residents who were coming out and find out where the smoke was from the building, from them?
I wouldn't have had the opportunity to, but no, I didn't.
Right. Okay. Now, you did Mike Dowden give you any kind of report as to anything the Bridgehead had told him at that point about internal fire or smoke spread?
No, the questions I asked Mike about BA operations, he hadn't got any detail of. He said, no, that's at the Bridgehead.
Okay.
So that was one of the reasons why I was going to send him to the Bridgehead to get that confirmation.
Now, going back to page 23 of your statement, you say a quarter of the way down that you were told, and I'm summarising, that Brett Loft had taken FSGs off Mike Dowden. And you said, he said his companies took the FSGs off me. He said he'd given the first SM a quick overview of what was happening, and as a result of this, he said he was going to take on the FSGs. He pointed towards the tower and said he's doing it from over there. Can you remember where he was pointing?
The general direction of the front of the building.
Okay.
I didn't see Brett Loft.
You didn't see
from where
Brett
I
Loft?
was.
Right, okay. Did you go and speak to Brett Loft?
Later on in the incident, yes.
Right. Was there any discussion between you and Mike Dowden about the strategy and kit that you'd need safely to evacuate residents, at least from the upper floors of the tower, in case it turned out they were trapped?
No, our procedure, our process is to send BA to where the calls come from, and normally that's standard duration breathing apparatus, because that's what we carry on the frontline appliances, like every other service in the country. And to not put too fine a point on it, the technique is you find a casualty, you grab them, you drag them through the hazard area as fast as you can, and you get them outside, because that's where they're going to get the medical treatment they need. And that is the standard way of rescuing people.
Sorry, I'm going to ask my question again. My question was, during this handover, was there any discussion between you and Mike Dowden about the strategy and the equipment that you need to be able safely to evacuate residents?
Only I want BA to every FSG. Are they trapped or aren't they trapped? If they are trapped, what do we need to get them out? I.e., if it's a group of 5 people, I'd expect 10 BA to be required to bring 5 people out, 2 for each person. So it would be a big team that would be sent. So that's the type of information that you expect the crews that make that initial contact to try and get back. or if you get any information prior to that, that's the sort of size of team you send to those types of locations.
Was there a discussion about whether you would need EDBA to be able to reach the upper parts of the tower?
We didn't discuss it. It was in the back of my mind, but I needed to get a better understanding of what was in front of me to be able to take that further. I knew that that FRU crews had been requested. I heard that on the way over, a make-up for 2, I think it was, FRU units. So I knew there was some EDBA on site, but if we use EDBA, we need additional EDBA to act as emergency crew to be able to bring them out if they get into difficulty, because they've got that further reach. So if I was going to switch to using EDBA as a tactic, I would need to resource it correctly. So I would need to have an idea about the level of EDBA commitment I required.
If you could go to page 26 of your statement, please, and look at a quarter of the way down. You say that the bridgehead had been established on the 2nd floor, and 3 lines down from that you say, I asked if he knew how many BA were in there. He replied they didn't. They were doing that at the bridgehead. I asked if he knew what they were doing, and again he replied he didn't, nor did he know if they'd got BA to the FSGs. All of this information was held at the bridgehead. I asked if he knew what was happening internally, making sure the fire wasn't getting back in, and again he said that information was at the bridgehead. So my question is, all of those questions get answered in the way you've said there. My question is the information that you'd asked for from Mike Diabon information that you would expect him to give you as incident commander?
At a smaller scale incident, he would have had that information. What Mike had done was identify, initially he dealt with a normal flat fire and they put the flat fire out. At that make pump 6, they extinguished the fire. It broke out of the window and got into the cladding. Once that happened, he was chasing the incident, and what he did, and I am okay to carry on, what he did as the initial incident commander was above and beyond anything that could have been expected of him.
Would you like
I am going to compose myself for a second, and I want to
If you
carry
want
on.
to sit down for a minute, do that.
No.
Take your time. There's no rush.
Okay. In my opinion, Mike had made a lot of assumptions that turned out to be correct about the nature of that fire. And he had resourced it to give us the option to try and save.
I think we ought to have a couple of minutes break.
I'll take 2 minutes, please.
Yeah, we'll break for 10 minutes. You go with the usher and don't talk to anyone about the evidence, all right? Right, 10 to 3, please. Yes, would you like to ask Mr. Walton to come back, please? Thank you. All right, ready to go on, Mr. Walton?
Yes, I am. Thank you for your consideration.
That's all right. Now, you might find it less troublesome if you just give short answers without so much explanation, because I've noticed that sometimes it's giving the explanation that causes you to have difficulties. So don't be frightened about just keeping it short.
Yeah, my only motivation in being here is to give the answers that are needed
Yeah, no, we
for the
understand
inquiry,
that.
and I will take that advice.
Yes. Well, Mr. Millett will tell you if he needs further information.
So,
All right?
yes, sir.
All right. Let's go.
There's my instructions as well. Mr. Walton, during your handover from Mike Dowden, did you have any discussion with him about whether there was a single staircase for evacuation if and when it was needed?
I asked what was the access egress. He told me there was only one way in and out of the building and one staircase.
Right. And did that affect the way you thought you'd need to go about forming an evacuation plan were one needed?
It affected my tactics. If the building has more than one staircase, you tend to designate one as a firefighting staircase for the reasons of fire hose may breach, doors, etc.
But here
and
we
you
have
have one as an evacuation staircase, because then none of the hose will impede that evacuation.
Right, but here we had one staircase, so did the fact that there was a single staircase affect your strategy?
It meant that we had to use that staircase for firefighting and for any evacuation of rescues.
Right, and did that fact affect your plans?
It was a fact that we had to deal with.
How did you deal with it?
We accepted the reality of the situation. There's nothing you can do. If you've got one staircase, there's nothing you can do about it. The aerial was there. It would always be a factor that you could perhaps go to if you needed to use the aerial for rescues, if it was able to reach the particular window that was required. That's probably the only other option we've got, is to bring in an appliance, but that's only effective up to the 10th floor, and only if you can get a pitch that gives you access to the windows that it would need to go to.
Did you have any discussion with Mike Dowden about the involvement of the cladding in the fire and the implications of that for how to go about fighting the fire?
It would have been very brief. It was probably when I was saying, is it on the balconies? Mike said there aren't any balconies. I then looked at the building again, and I said, I think he said, I think it's in the cladding.
Right.
And that was literally it.
And is it right that the involvement of the cladding wasn't something that was obvious to you before that?
As I say, I was on the misunderstanding or the belief that because it was two vertical lines, two columns, that it was jumping balconies as I approached. That really became apparent in the very early part of that handover, because it was one of the first questions.
Yeah, but when Mike said to you that he thought it's going up the cladding, as you told us, and it's in your notes, that was the first time, was it, that you realised that this wasn't balconies, it was the cladding that was involved in the fire?
That's when that became clear to me.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, did you then go on to discuss with Mike how you were going to tackle the fire, given that it was in the cladding, or the cladding was alight?
I could see the TL monitor. I could see there was a branch being trained, a jet from the ground floor area, and that was around the time that Mike mentioned that he'd tasked the through crew to go to the roof and see if they could get water being applied from above.
And about the through crew, when he told you about that, what was your view about the viability of that operation?
I called into question whether it was a safe enough operation. So I asked him what were the safe systems that were going to be put in place to allow a crew to be on the roof looking over the edge of a 22-storey building that's on fire.
What did he say?
And basically he said it's the through crew that are going up. I said, if they're going up there to do that, I want a restraint system. I want them anchored, lined on and restrained from going over the edge. He said it's a through crew. That's what I've asked them to do. They know what they're doing. They're a line crew. And I went, okay. And I let that happen.
My question was, what was your view of the viability of that operation? In other words, was it going to work and either extinguish or at least assist in extinguishing the exterior fire?
I think one of the lines Mike used was, it's worth a go. And I think it was probably that wording, and it was worth a go.
Right.
It was an option.
Now, page 26 of your witness statement, if I can just quickly take you to that. At the very top of the page, you say, I was happy with the firefighting side of things. I'll just wait till that comes up. Page 26, top of the page. I was happy with the firefighting side of things. I felt we were on top of that. It had been resourced up, and we had an attack on the initial fire. We had put that out. We were now beginning to tackle the fire that was spreading up the outside. What led you to think that you were on top of the fire spreading up the outside, if that's what you mean there?
What I'll explain is that I meant I was happy that we'd done everything it was possible to do at that moment. I was directing operations to stop the fire getting back into the building. We were doing everything we could to tackle the exterior fire, and it was having no effect. So I wanted our focus to be preventing it getting back in, and that's the tasking that I was given.
Apart from the worth ago line crew going to the roof that we've discussed, what was happening in terms of exterior firefighting at the top of the tower that led you to be happy, if this is what you mean, that you were on top of firefighting?
I think I've explained I wasn't happy with the situation. I wasn't happy that we were being effective. I was happy that we were doing anything that we could do with what we'd got. It was impossible to fight the fire on the exterior of the building, on the upper floors, and what we could reach, the water was having no effect.
Right. So when you say I was happy with the firefighting side of things,
I was happy there was nothing else we could do at that time,
right.
And we needed to change tack, and we had to try and stop the fire getting in.
Right. Going back to your discussion with Mike Dowden, did you discuss with him whether stay put should be withdrawn and an evacuation plan implemented?
There is no option to evacuate a building where the building principle has failed to the extent that the means of escape don't exist.
Right. Did you think at that time, during that handover, that the building had failed and the means of escape did not exist?
It was becoming more and more the assumption, and I just needed the confirmation from BA crews inside to either of those questions. Was it compromised to that level as far as the means of escape was concerned, and was it compromised to that level regarding fire spread from external back into the building?
Right. So at that stage, during your handover with Mike, it was becoming, you say, more and more the assumption that, and I'm trying to rephrase your evidence, that the building had failed. My question is really, during that discussion, did you have a discussion with Mike Dowden specifically about how you were going to get people out?
The only way we've got of getting people out is to grab them and physically drag or carry them down the method we've got of accessing them, which is that single staircase.
And my question is, did you discuss that subject with Mike Dowden during your
There was
handover?
nothing to discuss. It was the only option. He would know that. I would have been wasting time discussing that with him.
Right.
We send BA to where people are at the point of greatest danger. So that's part of the process, is determining who is at most risk. That's why those questions are asked.
Okay.
Send BA to those people, grab them first, and then go down the list in an order of priority in that way. But your only option is grab them, drag them out of the building, and get them to the medical treatment they need.
So, and correct me, Mr. Walton, if I'm wrong or putting words in your mouth, but are we to take it from that by the time your handover from Mike Dowden was finished and you were in command as the incident commander, you were of the view that the resources had to be deployed that you had available to send BA wearers into the tower and extract as many people as you could?
I think Mike was at that point in his thinking when I took over,
Okay.
and I was definitely of that opinion when I took command, and both of us had been directing resources to that effect, and that was the tactic that I was going to continue employing.
Right. Now, just tell me, how were you going to go about carrying that tactic out?
Relying on the professionalism, dedication and determination of the crews that were going to attend that incident.
Now, assuming, and I don't doubt what you said for a minute about the characteristics of individual firefighters, but assuming that that's entirely reliable, my question isn't so much about the people you've got, but about the plan. And I'll repeat the question. Having come to the conclusion, as I think you've told us, that you had to deploy BA wearers into the tower to extract as many people as you could, by what methods, tactics, strategies would you use the resources in order to carry out that tactic?
So I needed to know where people were at greatest risk in that building. There were a lot of people who were indicating they believed they were trapped. I needed to try and find out who was at greatest risk, and they would be our priorities. So it goes back to those questions. What are the conditions inside? Where are they at their worst? What do we need to get people out of those conditions? And where is the fire threatening the most people earliest? So where is the fire getting back in? What can we do to slow that down or to stop it from happening? So those are the objectives that I'm trying to achieve, finding out where people are at most risk and then prioritising action to deal with them in that sort of order. So that's why those questions were asked, that's why that information was so important, and that's why I was driving the incident in that direction. We were trying to stop the fire on the external as best we could. It wasn't working. I needed to make sure we were stopping it getting back in inside. That would give us the time to get to the people and get them out.
Right. So, although you at that stage didn't know that fire was coming back into flats at that point,
Can
I just put the question? Even though that was the case, am I to take it that you thought it was such a sufficient risk that the tactic that you've just described should be undertaken?
Again, without trying to put too much detail in, we only get a certain amount of information in that really short time that we can gather it. We get as much information as we can, but we have to make decisions. We haven't got time to wait for the full picture. So once we've got enough information to give us a very good indication, we have to make assumptions. And you initially deal with the incident based on those informed assumptions. Part of my process as a level 2 commander is to check those assumptions of the initial commander and then build on those assumptions, because if there is more information like I was asking for, that makes your direction more certain and you can press further forward. Or if you get contrary information, you can stop that action and take the correct direction. So I have to ask those questions as a level 2 commander, but it's not just a process we follow. It's because it's the only way you can deal with an incident in that dynamic early stage.
Now, having received the handover from Mike Dowden, you're now in incident command. Very briefly, what did you do next in terms of steps?
Okay, when I'd got my information off Mike, that process was continually interrupted by VA crews and officers coming to Mike for taskings, because I left Mike in the tabard, in charge, while I was getting my situational awareness, because he had got as much information, I didn't have it all off him yet. So I was comfortable to be on his shoulder and privy to the conversation, but let him be the focal point and him direct operations until I'd got that understanding. Once I'd got to that point, I took the tabard off him. I directed him to go to the Bridgehead. I wanted him to get that information we've talked about regarding the conditions for the FSGs, what we needed to get them out if they were trapped, get BA to the fire face, and I pointed to the face of the building. There was one face of the building. Get BA to the fire face, determine whether the fire's getting back in or not. If it looks like it's coming in, stop it. If we can't stop it, can we hold it? What do we need to do that? So those are the taskings I gave Mike, and I went to send him on his way.
Yes.
Another BA crew approached at the same time as the LAS initial response approached. So I said to Mike, you deal with the BA, I'll brief the LAS. And I did a JESIP command briefing to the LAS to bring them up to speed, and then directed Mike back into the building for Bridgehead. I know this is going on a bit, but it will answer your question. Once I'd dealt with the LAS, my main priorities were, I knew we got 25 pump makeup. I just had the conversation with the LAS about where their triage point was, and I knew they needed Grenfell Road keeping clear for ambulances. We hadn't got an RVP declared for the LFB, let alone any other emergency service. That was a major priority to me at that time, because there was probably another 10 to 15 fire engines en route, plus all the additional officers and that ambulance response that they were now initiating. And I needed to have that organised. You can't do that without a map and finding where it can go. So I needed to speak to a command unit operator to get the RVP put in. If I had either of those questions answered in the affirmative, it was going to be a major incident. I didn't know the name of the road I was on, and I needed that for the methane message for the major incident to be declared. And I didn't know the RVP, and I needed that for the methane message to be declared a major. So those were, in effect, those were the operational priorities that I tasked Mike to deal with. These were the incident management priorities that I needed to have happen.
Okay.
So I was then looking to try and close down those two areas.
Did Mike Dowden leave you to go to the Bridgehead as you had asked him to do before DAC O'Loughlin arrived?
So as I turned from the ambulance staff, and I'm thinking, where's my command unit crew? I need to get this info. I was looking then for any watch manager, any crew manager, to give them that task and to get it to the command unit.
Yes.
Mike was walking towards the tower with the BA crew he'd just tasked, and I turned looking for the JO, and I saw Andy O'Loughlin.
Right.
So I walked to Andy O'Loughlin. I was in the tabard. He said, "Are you in charge?" I said, "Yes, I've just taken over from that watch manager." And Andy said, "Come here," and we both briefed Andy O'Loughlin at the same time.
How many minutes do you think elapsed, roughly, between your finishing your handover from Mike Dowden and having your initial conversation with Andy O'Loughlin?
The time it took for me to brief the LAS and the time it took for Mike to brief the BA crew.
Right.
Probably 2 minutes. I could probably recount the briefing I gave the LAS, and you could time it,
No, it's
because,
okay.
you know.
Right. Now, as soon as... sorry, where physically were you at the point where you saw Andy O'Loughlin?
I'd come off the grass mound because I'd moved down onto the paved area at the side of the grass bank, and I was stood, I believe, on the footpath, but it may have been in the road, and I was speaking to the LAS at that point because it was literally, we'll put the triage point here, and I'd taken about 3 paces from that back towards the building.
Right. Okay.
When I saw Andy O'Loughlin.
Okay, so you're more or less in the southeast corner of the building.
Corner, looking back, probably about 20 to 30 metres from the base of the tower.
Up to the southeast?
To the southeast corner. So we're on Grenfell Road,
You're on Grenfell.
where it bends into where the covered area was.
Right. Was Mike Dowden present at any point when you were talking to Andy O'Loughlin?
Yeah, he was there the whole time. As I say, other than me saying, I've just taken over, that is the watch manager I've taken over from, Andy O'Loughlin then shouted, come here, he turned around and he came back over.
Oh, I see.
So Mike was there for the majority of my handover briefing.
Yes.
And the way it worked was I went through my standard framework that I gather or disseminate information, and if I said something that Mike knew a little bit more information about or thought I might have potentially got wrong, he would chip in and correct it. So Mike stood there and interjected when he had something he would add to the briefing I was giving.
Okay. So it was basically a handover by both of you to Andy O'Loughlin.
In effect, yeah.
I follow. As a side question, were you aware at that point that Group Manager Welch was on the incident ground?
No.
Okay. How long was the handover to DAC O'Loughlin, do you think?
Because I'd done the time, the time-consuming gathering situational awareness, I think it was a lot quicker. I think it would probably be 90 seconds, 2 minutes max. I went through the life risk we knew about, the fire hazards we knew about, the other hazards we knew about, what the priorities were that I'd identified, what the objectives I thought were, and what I was going to be doing next. And Andy took that on board. He asked a couple of clarifying questions, which is the normal way, and then said, right, this is my priorities, this is what I want you to do, and he tasked us.
Did you tell Andy O'Loughlin that the fire was only on the outside of the building?
I told him that we had a fully involved flat fire on the 4th floor. BA crews had extinguished the fire, but it had got out into the cladding. We've now got this spreading fire at the south face that you can see. There's nobody in the original flat fire. We've got all of the life risk out of that original flat fire. We're getting multiple FSGs throughout the building. We've got BA crews trying to get to the FSGs to confirm what the conditions are. I've asked for BA crews to go to the inside face of the building and fight the fire. My priorities are X, Y, Z, and that was the sort of briefing that I gave.
So I'm just trying to work out what the answer to my question is.
If you repeat the question, I'll focus on the piece that fits that.
Did you tell Andy O'Loughlin that the fire was only on the outside of the building?
I told him that the initial fire was extinguished and we had a spreading fire in the outside of the building.
And in his statement, and clearly we'll have to explore this with him when he comes to give evidence, but his recollection is that what he got from the briefing was that the fire was only on the outside. Is that what...
You could infer that because I've said the fire that was inside we've extinguished and we've got a fire that is spreading on the outside.
Did you discuss the effectiveness of the existing firefighting measures?
I don't think I needed to. You could see from where we were what was actually happening when the water hit the outside of the building. I didn't discuss how effective they were.
Okay. Did you have a discussion about what additional firefighting measures might be necessary in order to attack the fire?
I did tell him about the through crew had been tasked to go to the roof and see if they could implement and he had the same sort of questions as I'd given about is that safe? And we gave him the same sort of reassurances that I'd been given, and again he accepted them at face value, and that was happening as far as we were concerned.
Did he give you the impression as to what he thought about whether that was a sensible use of EDBA resources?
He didn't stop it from happening. It wasn't so much that they were EDBA crews. The through units carry EDBA, but they also have a specialism, and the unit that we were talking about was a line rescue unit, so they are skilled at setting up safe systems of work using ropes to restrain people from going over edges or to rescuing people using lines. So it was that aspect of their skills. It wasn't the EDBA that we were focused on. It was the fact that they could implement the safe system to allow firefighters to go to the edge of the roof of a 22-storey block and not fall off.
Right. Was there any discussion on this topic between you, Mike Dowden, and Andy O'Loughlin about whether or not the EDBA crew that was there, I think of 5 actually, would have been better used going up the inside of the tower to effect rescues from the topmost part of the tower? It wasn't part of that. Is there any reason you can think of as to why that wasn't even on your radar?
We were focused on the unique skill they had on the fire ground, which was the line rescue element,
right.
And that's the only reason why I can think that.
How are they going to, out of interest, how are they going to extinguish or damp down the fire by going to the roof and attacking it from up there. What were they actually going to do?
The idea was that if you could introduce water between the cladding and the outside face of the building, in effect get a wall of water between the cladding and the building, a waterfall between the cladding and the building, that could prevent it getting back in.
Right. Was any thought given to how you would actually get water up to the top of the building? In order
There's
to
a dry rising main.
This is
There's a main that we use to get water to every level in that building. Without discussing it, because we didn't, my assumption would be the crew would set in at the highest outlet, run hose across the top of the roof, rig it up, probably lash it off in position so it could be left, and just put as much water through it as they could.
Right. Now, did you have any discussion during that handover of the need to get hold of ALPs, aerial ladder platforms, with a higher reach than that which the LFB had, such as the Surrey platform?
No.
No. Did you talk about the number of FSGs?
Other than there are multiple FSGs on every level in this building. It was words to that effect. I don't know the exact wording, but it was, I made the point that they are all over the place in this building. There's not a cluster, it's not a band, they are through it. But I didn't say it that clearly. I said there are FSGs all over this building.
Right. Did you or Mike Dowden tell Andy O'Loughlin that a station manager, Brett Loft as it was, had been tasked with running the FSGs?
Yeah, that was part of my briefing.
You did tell him that?
Yeah, I said there are multiple FSGs throughout the building. There's a station manager who's in charge of FSG. I don't know their name. All I know is they're over there at the base of the tower. That was where I was moving next. Right. And that was after I'd got the RVP and the other taskings in that manner. That was the next thing. Let's get to the FSG. Let's find out, is the information getting to him? Is it getting from him to the Bridgehead?
Did you discuss the strategy or tactic of how you were going to send BA wearers into the tower and evacuate or extract as many residents as you could?
The only way that we discussed that was, at the moment, everyone is rigging and everyone is being committed.
Right. Did you discuss the subject of what advice control room operators should be giving to callers?
No.
So stay put wasn't discussed?
There wasn't. Right? Yeah, no, it wasn't. No.
Okay. Mr. O'Loughlin says in his statement that he expected that the building should protect itself from burning cladding. Is that something he discussed with you? Do you remember?
I can't remember that phrase being used, no.
All right. In addition to briefing Andy O'Loughlin on what you knew, was he aware, or did, so far as you know, of whether there was feedback from the Bridgehead to the command unit or the command unit to control about the success or failure of particular BA deployments?
I hadn't made contact with Brett Loft at that point. That would have been that was one of the things I was going to be trying to confirm.
Did you have a discussion with Andy O'Loughlin about the effectiveness of radio communications as you were experiencing them on the incident ground?
When I said what my priorities were, one of them wasn't the top priority, but one of the priorities, probably about the third or fourth in what I said, was that radios are completely ineffectual, they're swamped, we need dedicated channels as fast as possible. Now,
I want to examine with you in some detail a specific subject, and it's the ventilation, or the smoke ventilation system, if I can. First, are you aware, even in general terms, of a policy requirement that an incident commander shouldn't make any changes to a high-rise building's ventilation or fire safety system without first taking appropriate advice from the responsible person, such as the building owner or the tenant management organisation, or an appropriately trained FRA personnel?
Yeah, I'm aware of that, but in reality
terms.
It would be that you would get the senior fire safety officer involved and you get them talking to the responsible person, and you'd take the word of the FSO. Right.
At that stage, were you aware of an FRA fire safety person on the incident ground?
I knew there would be one mobilised at that level of mobilisation, but I hadn't seen them.
Right. Did you think to have a conversation with them to look at the things they should be looking at, such as the fire?
they'd have made themselves known to me, that would have been one thing I would have tasked.
Okay. Now, can I just ask you to look at a CCTV image? This is INQ 343. And it's camera 3. There are two cameras in the lobby of Grenfell Tower, Mr. Walton, and this is camera 3, looking towards the back of the lobby from the main door. And this is taken at an adjusted time of 02:01:53. Do you think you can see yourself in that image?
I'm probably the shortest person in the image, in the middle of the picture.
With your left arm raised?
Yeah.
And to your right, our left, there's another white helmet. Do you know who that might be?
I can't tell from that.
Okay. I think you told us earlier, in response to my question, that you hadn't seen the mobile data, haven't been able to use the mobile data terminal en route, so that means you hadn't looked at the ORD en route.
Yeah.
Is that right? Okay. Did you ask Mike Dowden to operate the smoke ventilation system? Do you remember?
Yeah, that's an unusual layout, the base of the tower. It's a sort of a 2-storey atrium, and with a glass partition at the side. And it was that unusual layout that triggered my memory that I'd been in the building before for the smoke demonstration. And so it was like a realisation I've been here before.
Right.
Then a realisation as to why I'd been there. I looked around the lobby, remembering that they demonstrated a smoke extraction system and there was a control panel, and I thought it was in the lobby. I saw a box on the wall, and again, the sort of thought process was, well, I wouldn't know how to work that. The local station might. And I shouted to Mike Dowden, Mike, because I knew he was the local station, yes. Is that the smoke control panel? Is it working?
Right. And does this photograph capture the moment or around the moment when you asked Mike Dowden that question?
I think it's probably slightly after. I think because I was en route to the base of the stairs, which are on the right-hand side. The stairs are where I'm looking.
Yes.
And so I was moving to those stairs to make my way up to the Bridgehead. And I think I'd directed Mike to the panel, and then I don't know what I'm doing. I'm obviously giving some sort of instruction about what I want to happen in the lobby, but my focus was on getting up to the Bridgehead. But my recollection is I waited at the base of the stairs. There's a glass doorway into the staircase enclosure, and I waited there for the indication as to whether it was working or not, because obviously that could affect the way we used it. And I can't remember how he indicated it. I can't remember if he shook his head or if he said it's not working or no. But I know that as I went onto the staircase, I knew the smoke extraction system was not working.
Now, if you go to page 30 of your witness statement, you say much the same thing, but can I just direct you to the middle of the page? You say, halfway down, I thought I didn't know how to use it as I hadn't looked. I'd never thought I would have to know how to use it. As he was local, you say, I thought he might know how to use it. So as he was on his way over to the lift, I shouted at him and said, Mike, that's the smoke control panel. Do you know how to use it? He didn't say yes or no. He just looked at it. And I said, check that panel and make sure it's working. He went over and looked at it and said no, and went to the lifts. And from that, my assumption was that the smoke control system had failed. And that was why there were FSGs, because they had got smoke-logged staircases. Now,
all assumptions based on what I'd heard and seen.
Okay. Then I suppose answers my question is it fair to say that you assumed the smoke control system had failed, but didn't yourself check it to confirm the position yourself?
I've sent an officer to check. I take the answer I get. I haven't got time to go and do the jobs that I've tasked other people to do. So I trust Mike Dowden. I had worked with him before. I thought he was a competent officer. I definitely still do. And I took the answer at face value. Right. And I've got no reason to doubt it.
Did you see him or watch him attempting to operate it?
I saw him go to the panel. He had his back to me, and he turned around and gave the indication. And I'm not, again, I cannot recall what the indication was. I just know what I took from it.
Right. You say you didn't see him, is this right, actually physically touch the panel or try to activate it yourself?
I don't have any recollection of seeing that happening.
Right. Can I just ask you to look at your email that you sent after the event? It's MET quadruple 05713. This is an email you sent to Steve Apter on the 18th of June 2017. Steve Apter is Director of Safety and Assurance, and also to Charlie Pugsley. And you say, "Sir, I've just recalled an action or omission by me in the early stages of the Grenfell Tower incident, which I urgently bring to your attention." And I'll read you this whole paragraph.
Yeah.
As I moved to take up the fire sector commander role, I passed through the lobby and encountered Watch Manager Dowden, an original incident commander. I directed him to make sure the smoke extraction system was operating using the control panel on the wall in the lobby. He went to the panel, seemed to try and operate a touchpad on the screen, and came back to me and said something like, "It's not working," or "It's not operating." I cannot be sure of the exact wording. I know my understanding was that the system had failed and that Watch Manager Dowden had tried to turn it on, but it wasn't responding. We then continued up to the Bridgehead to carry out the rules we'd been given. Now, just looking at that email, it was sent 4 days after the incident. Mm-hmm. Is what you said in that email correct, or is what you're now telling us correct, that you didn't see Mike operating it?
That is more contemporaneous, so I would say that is what I thought at that time.
Right. Now, Mike Dowden's given some evidence to us about that when he came in June. And he said that he didn't attempt to operate the panel, only the key switch in the lobby. And just for our own reference, that's transcript of the 26th of June 2018 at page 136, lines 1 to 10, just so we've got that. Just in terms of his evidence, do you think you were mistaken in your email when you say he attempted to operate the panel?
He had his back to me. Those are probably assumptions I made, that he moved his arm towards the panel, and I couldn't see what he was doing from where I was.
Right.
So they're probably assumptions. The key about that email was is the next part of the email, the thing that I'm trying to draw to the attention, and that's what I didn't know if I passed that information on in the command chain.
Right.
I can't remember if it was part of my briefing, and that is key information to the next incident commander. It would have been key information to Richard Welch on the Bridgehead when he took over from me as fire sector commander from me, and I genuinely, honestly believe I would have passed that information on, but I cannot remember. And I thought it was it was too important not to make it known that I can't remember if I passed it on. That's why I sent that email.
No, I understand. I'm just actually focusing on what you can remember about Mike Dowden's actions in front of the panel. Did you recall, at this moment, anything, at this moment, when you were standing in front of the panel with Mike Dowden, if that is him, at just after 2 a.m. on the morning of the fire? Did you recall anything from your 2016 visit about how the system might operate?
No. I remembered the panel was key to the operation of the system. And that's all I remembered.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you remember anything about the caretaker that you'd been told?
I don't think I did. I honestly don't think it went through my brain.
Did you think to find out who the responsible person was who might know how to work the panel?
I was taking over fire sector commander. I was focused on, bearing in mind what I've already said about how I had got the opinion that everybody was trapped in that building and we needed to rescue them. I was focused on getting up to where that was happening and taking charge of that.
Right.
So, again, it's an assumption, but my assumption would be that the commander behind me, who would probably be on the command unit, would be going through those sort of processes, because they've got the the luxury of it being the next step down the chain. They've had a little bit longer, a little bit more information.
But that was an assumption you made.
Yeah, it's an assumption we would all make, is that as the incident progresses and you hand command on, the commander behind you, as I said with Mike, I've checked Mike's assumptions and tried to fill any gaps that might be there. The same thing would have happened with me with Andy O'Loughlin, and the same thing would have happened with him when he was taken over from him. That each incident commander fills the picture, that next step, because it's so dynamic initially.
Did you?
Yeah.
Is there any reason why, apart from trusting Mike Dowden would do it, any reason why you didn't attempt to operate the smoke ventilation system yourself?
I knew I hadn't paid attention to the detail. I just made sure that it would have been captured and recorded as instructions. So I knew I hadn't paid attention to the detail, and I'm not there to be focused on a panel. I'm there to be focused on rescuing the people in the building. That is the role I've been given in the command structure. That's the one I'm going to deliver, and that's what I went to do.
Right. To the best of your knowledge, who was the first LFB officer to attend the fire who would have been appropriately trained in the use of this smoke extraction system?
No LFB officer would have been trained in the use of that smoke extraction system. The senior fire safety officers are trained in general terms about fixed installations, and they would use that general knowledge to interpret the system that they're encountering.
Right.
And that's where the local responsible person contact is so useful, because they're applying a general knowledge and the local representative's got the specifics, and they just apply that to what they're dealing with.
Can we look at another picture, which is INQ quintuple 0339? Now, there it is. This is CCTV image with an adjusted time of 1:57:54. So I think that's just before you go to it. It's open. If we zoom into it, I think we can see some written instructions at the bottom of the panel. It's not that easy to see, and perhaps we need to zoom a bit more. Well, that's not. I think it's going to get worse the closer we get. To the best of your recollection, Mr. Walton, were there instructions on how to use this system?
I never went to the panel.
You
I
never
never
looked
saw
inside the panel. Right. Let me see if I can do a little better. Can I ask you please to go to BLA? Well, I'm looking at the clock, and I've been nudged by Mr. Kinnear. Mr. Chairman, perhaps this is an appropriate time for another short break.
I am happy for you to do one more image if that closes this line.
Should we go on a little bit?
Yes, sir.
We'll certainly stop in another 10 minutes.
We'll stop at the end of this topic then. So if you could please be showing BLA quadruple 02966. This is a photograph taken by the inquiry of the inside of the smoke vent box and the instructions that are there, the Grenfell Tower smoke extract system. My question is, do you remember seeing these on the night? And I think you said you didn't look inside the box. Are these even familiar to you from your 2016 introduction to the system?
They weren't there in 2016 because that's why we asked them to write them.
Yeah, that's basic how to use guide. All right, would those instructions be the sorts of things that you would expect to be on the ORD and available to an incident commander through the MDT?
Yeah, if I'd encountered that, I would have got it onto the ORD.
Okay. Now, you can see the various steps, and the second step is override for manual control of individual floors, whereby you switch the main control panel from auto to on, as you can see, and then a second key to be used in yellow smoke extract key switch in each lift lobby to manually operate dampers on individual floors. Now, I know you didn't see these instructions. Does that trigger a recollection as to the kind of thing you were told about how to operate the system when you went in April 2016 to the
When,
tower?
when I was asked specific questions last week, an image of those yellow box control panels was part of the questioning pack that was sent to me.
It was.
Seeing that yellow box prompted a really, really vague recollection, and I mean really vague, of there was a system where you could, that affected the use of the fans on the floor, but I couldn't tell you how he did it, and I couldn't really tell you what the effect of it was.
Right, okay. To the best of your recollection, do you think anybody understood these instructions on the night of the fire?
That'd be supposition by me, but I didn't know they were there.
Now, in your supplemental statement, can I just ask you please to turn to paragraphs 42 and 44? You say in paragraph 42, it's page 11 internally, yes, you record Mike Dowden saying it isn't working, and then you say, in the split second after he indicated this, I took it to mean that the smoke extraction system wasn't operating, removing smoke from the flat lobbies or protecting the staircases from smoke entering them. I assumed this to be because the fans and vents were not operating for some reason. Now, that's an assumption, is it,
Yeah.
that you made on the night?
Complete assumption. As I moved from the lobby, I assumed the fire was spreading up the outside of the building in a way I didn't think it could possibly do. I knew the smoke extraction wasn't working. I knew the lifts weren't working. I suspected the fire was going to breach on multiple floors. And I had formed the opinion I couldn't rely on anything in that building.
Right.
And I was moving to the Bridgehead as Fire Sector Commander to initiate rescue and firefighting on that basis.
Okay. Can I just focus on two phrases in paragraphs 42 and 44? I've shown you 42. You say in 42, 3 lines up from the end of the paragraph, removing smoke from the flat lobbies or protecting the staircases from smoke entering them. And then in 44 you say, 3 lines down, the system protecting the lobbies and staircase failed. Now my question, because you're linking lobbies and staircases there, my question is, was it your understanding on the night of the fire that the system should have operated on multiple floors and also been capable of dealing with smoke in multiple lobbies and the staircase?
Based on my contemporaneous note, that must have been my assumption, because that's what I wrote in my contemporaneous note. Based on my reflection, since I was given specific detail, and I revisited that familiarisation visit in my mind, I now believe that that system covered the lobbies, and it was either inferred or stated that because it kept the lobbies clear, it would keep the staircase clear. So my assumption was that that system would keep, or was designed to keep, the lobby and the staircase clear, but I don't think the extraction was in the staircase. I think it was in the lobby.
Now, I know we've covered this in part. Having been told by Mike Dowden it's not working, or words to that effect, did you think to get someone to get hold of the building owner, to bring them down urgently to the tower, to get it working, or to find out why it wasn't working?
I was moving to Fire Sector Commander. I was focused completely on the rescue and the firefighting. I didn't think to get that message out of the tower to the incident commander. So
what would happen then? Mike said it wasn't working, you didn't pass the message on or get RBKC or the TMO there. What were your thoughts about how the smoke extraction system could then be used?
I didn't know, I still don't know, if I briefed Richard Welch to that effect. I can't recall if I did or I didn't.
Right.
I would expect I did, but I don't know. I would expect, but I don't know because I wasn't on the command unit, that the subsequent incident commanders would get the ORD information, they would look at what fixed installations were in the building, see if they were going to be able to be used, and they would have been checking if they could use that smoke extraction. Was it operating? Could it work? That's what I believe would happen, and I've got no reason to think it didn't happen on the night.
Right.
Would that be a good point,
It would.
Mr. Millett?
Yes, yes, Mr.
Yeah.
Chairman, it would.
I think we'll have another break now, Mr. Walton. So you go to the usher, don't talk to anyone about their evidence, please, and we'll be back at 10 to 4.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good, 10 to 4 then, please. Yes, would you ask Mr. Walton to come in, please? Thank you. Right, you happy to carry on, Mr. Walton?
Yes, I am.
Yes, very good. Yes, Mr. Millett?
Thank you for coming back, Mr. Walton. Can I just revisit one little topic about the smoke vent system on the night? And we're talking about what Mike Dowden did with it. His evidence was that he went to activate the point using the keys and switch it to manual, but he decided against it because he didn't want to interfere with a fire solution in the building because it could worsen the situation for both residents and firefighters. That's the gist of his evidence. And he says that he told you of his actions and then put the keys to the smoke panel in the lobby area where he'd found them. Does that assist you with remembering what was said during your exchange with Mr. Dowden in relation to the smoke vent system?
As I say, I've got no recollection of any discussion, any conversation with Mike after he went to the panel. There was an indication it wasn't working. I left the lobby and went to the Bridgehead to take over Fire Sector Commander.
Right.
I didn't discuss anything with him. I just went.
Okay.
That's my recollection.
Okay. Now, just turning to a different topic, which is your journey to the Bridgehead. You go to the Bridgehead, I think, shortly after this smoke vent discussion takes place. Is that right?
After I detailed him to go to the panel, yes.
Yeah. So just after 2 a.m.
That would be that from the
Okay.
picture
Now,
taken.
at page 31 of your statement, you say a third of the way, or a quarter of the way down, you ask who's in charge on this Bridgehead. And you say, listen up, who's in charge on the Bridgehead? Station manager wants to know. And an Irish voice, someone I didn't know, came from the corner, I'm in charge. So I shouted, come to me, and we headed towards each other. I now know it was Brian O'Keefe, but at the time I couldn't remember, even though he told me his name.
Mm-hmm.
I told him I was up there for Fire Sector Commander and was going to be taking the sector. I told him I was going to organise the Bridgehead. Now, did he react? What was his reaction to that?
Again, the sort of briefing that took place was I told him what I wanted to know. I asked him to show me where the BA were being directed from, and he showed me the entry control point.
Right.
And I had a quick look at the entry control point, and I could see there was information starting to go on the wall. And I said, we needed more boards up here. I don't want it on the walls, I want it on the boards. And one of the officers who was actually writing the information on the wall told me there was too much information, it wouldn't go on boards. And I said, it will if we get enough. Something like that. So there was that sort of discussion there. I don't think it was with Brian O'Keefe. I then said to Brian the tasking that I'd already talked about to Mike Dowden. So I said, I want to know about the FSGs. Are we getting BA to them? Are they trapped, or do they think they're trapped? If they're trapped, what do we need to bring them out? I want to know, are we getting BA to this face? And we were stood facing this direction with the balconies behind me. And so I pointed to my right to indicate the face of the building I was worried about. I said, are we getting BA whereas to this face? I want to know if this fire, which is going up the outside of the building, is getting back in. If it's getting back in, can we stop it? If we're going to stop it, what do we need? Once you've got that, I want to know how many BA are in, where are they, what are their priorities, where do we know is searched, where do we know there's fires, and actually that last part, where do we know there's fires, I can't remember if I said that, but I did say, where do we know we're searched, and what resources are you going to need? I'll be back to you in about 2 minutes. I want those answers. Where are the fib boards? Where's the FSG information being coordinated? He said over there, and I went over to the watch manager who's doing the fib boards. I didn't have a discussion as such. I stated what I wanted to know, go and get it, and then I moved away.
You've given us a long list of questions you asked him.
Yeah.
Did you get answers to each of those?
No.
Not at all?
I said, I think it started off, it would be something like, do you know how many BA you've got in? And that was right, this would be it. I said, how many BA have we got in? He said, come over here, I'll show you the boards. And that's when I looked at the boards, because that gave me an indication of how many tallies were in the boards. That gives me an idea of how many wearers are in. And I thought, well, I'm not going to count the tallies, and I'm not going to look at the remarks column of where they are. So I said to him, this is what I want to know. Get that information, and I will come back to you. And then I moved on to the fib boards, because I was going to do the same sort of process with the fire soil guidance information. And then I was going to go to the balcony and organise the balcony, because I'd just come through that and it was not passable. And I knew that that was the only staircase in the building, and if any casualties were coming out, they were going to have to go across that balcony. Right. And I needed to get it clear so casualties could egress.
Right, let me see if I can break all that down a bit by reference to some specific questions. Did Brian O'Keefe at that stage, when you had this discussion with him, tell you about the smoke conditions in the stairs?
I don't recall asking that information in that way. I asked are they trapped or aren't they trapped? If they're trapped, what do we need to get them out?
Right. Did he give you any information about the smoke conditions in any of the lobbies?
It'd be the same answer. I never asked that question, so he never gave me that answer.
Right. Did he give you any information about how high up into the building BA wearers had managed to get thus far?
That was part of the where's searched, where are we going next?
Yeah, what was his answer?
He hadn't got it at that point. I asked him to have it ready when I got back to him in the next 2 minutes.
Okay.
Basically, I was priming them what I wanted to know, and I wasn't going to take the time while they got that information.
Right.
I was moving to the next task to prime them, and then I was going to do the round robin again and get the information that I'd been requested. It's a common way of doing this, in my opinion. I believe it is. It's the way I've always done it, where you prime what you need to know, and while they're doing that, gathering that information, you don't stand there and wait. You move to the next, prime them, and by that time, you're ready for that information to come back.
Okay, let's go to the point at which you were ready for the information to come back to you from Brian O'Keefe. At that point, did he tell you about the smoke condition in the stairs?
I didn't get to that point. As I moved from Watch Manager De Silvo, who was running the FSG information, I walked from the lift lobby area back towards the balcony to get the balcony cleared enough for casualties to pass. As I was adjacent to the base of the main staircase, Group Manager Welch met me, and I was still wearing the incident commander tabard, because when we had the handover with Andy O'Loughlin and he directed me to Fire Sector Commander, I said to him, because I knew there was a lot of resources gone into the building, I'm going to keep this on until I get given a Fire Sector Commander tabard, so that they know who's in charge up there.
Right, Mr. Walton, I'm sorry, it's getting late in the afternoon, and I don't want to.
But this is key, because I went to go to the Bridgehead. I'll answer the original question. I went to go to the Bridgehead balcony, and I didn't get there, and I was relieved of the Fire Sector Commander role by Group Manager Welch, who had been sent there to take that on, and I got given a different role, which was to become BA Logistics on the balcony. So I briefed Group Manager Welch with what I was doing and what my next task would be, and that Brian O'Keefe had been briefed to have that information. Louisa De Silvo, I checked if she needed any assistance, and we'd agreed that she could probably do with a couple of crew managers to assist her, and I was now going to sort the balcony out. He said, right, I'm taking over as Fire Sector Commander, you go and sort the balcony. So I didn't get back to Brian O'Keefe, so that information never came to me.
So is the short answer to my question about the answers to the list of questions that you'd posed to him, that you didn't get the answers because you were deployed by Richard Welch to do the balcony?
Yes.
Right. Now, you say on page 32, and I'm going to come back to Richard Welch in due course, but you say on page 32 of your statement that you moved over to Lou De Silva. This is 3 lines down. She had at least 2 FIB boards running. The one that was absolutely full had information such as flat numbers, who was it in, that sort of stuff. And the one that was half full, she was filling it, and it appeared she was talking to people on the radio, getting information. I didn't want to interrupt her, but in between I said, Lou, are you overwhelmed by this, or can you run this? And she went, I could do with a bit of help, so I said I'd try and get her some crew managers to take some of the traffic. Now, my first question is, did you get some crew managers to take some of the traffic?
I believe that was part of my handover to Richard Welch.
Okay. So, well, do you know whether he did?
I don't know.
Okay. Now, you say there were at least 2 FIBs running, one absolutely full with flat numbers and one half full, you say. I just wonder whether we can identify the full one. Can I ask you please to be shown MET 000015935? 15935.
That's not the board.
That's not the board.
It was using the casualty poster, the board that I initially saw. It's gridded for
Right.
the purpose of FSG, and that was the board that was being used by Louisa De Silva when I got to the Bridgehead.
I see. Do you recognise this item at all from your visit to the Bridgehead when it was on the second floor?
Well, it's one of the boards that can be used as a forward information board. We've got 3 or 4 different laminates that can be used. One is the casualty poster, which is designed specifically for FSG. I remember registering that she was using the FSG casualty poster, so I knew it was an organised, controlled management of that information.
Right. And on that casualty poster, what do you remember, in generic terms, what detail there was?
That there were the column headings were being completed in the correct manner.
Right.
So there were a number of flat numbers, there were a number of indications of how many people were in there, that type of thing. I didn't look at any of the detail. I just wanted to make sure that information was getting from the control to the incident ground and getting from the incident ground to the Bridgehead. And that was an indication that there was information getting to the Bridgehead.
Right.
I was going to come back and go into the detail.
Now, you referred to writing on the second floor wall earlier on in your evidence this afternoon. Do you remember who was putting the writing up on the wall?
At the entry control point, on the left-hand side of the board, there was, I think, a firefighter who was writing information at the side of the entry control boards. And when I met Richard Welch and started to give my handover, one of the first things he asked me for was a chinograph. And as I gave him my handover, he was writing key points on the wall at the base of the staircase on that corridor. As I said stuff, he was writing the key points down.
Okay. Can I ask you to be shown a photograph, which is MET 0001593. Sorry, I'm so sorry. 0001374. There. Is that familiar to you, do you think?
No.
No. Firefighter O'Byrne gave the evidence that he was writing that on the wall on the second floor when the Bridgehead was there.
It could be. I didn't see any of
You
the
didn't see
detail where that was happening. I saw the act of writing on the wall.
Right.
And because of the training I'd had about Lacanau, where they had to relocate a Bridgehead and information, it was difficult to move information, and that's where forward information boards had come from. And because I delivered back to basics training, where that was a key aspect of it, I didn't want that happening. So I challenged it and said, get more boards up, use the boards. But I didn't see that actioned because I moved on and I never got back to check again.
Okay. Did you see a watch manager writing FSG information on the wall on the back of the second floor balcony?
When I got onto the balcony on my way in, there was a watch manager at the end of the balcony.
Yes.
I touched base with them in the same way I was touched base with Brian O'Keefe, etc. So on my way in, I said, I'm up here as Fire Sector Commander. Are you doing BA logistics? The answer was yes. I said, right, I want to know what BA we've got on the balcony, what equipment we've got. I'm going to come back to you in a minute. Have that answer for me. I'll be back in about 2 minutes. Then I went to Brian O'Keefe, same sort of conversation. Went to Louisa De Silva, and I was on that return leg when I met Richard Welch.
I see. Do you remember, to the best of your recollection, whether you saw FSG information relating to higher floors inscribed on the walls or the forward information boards?
I can 100% say I never saw any FSG information on walls, other than later in the incident, in the lobby where Glyn Williams was doing a schematic and recording information on the wall there while I was doing the sort of lobby sector commander role that I evolved into later in the incident.
Right. During the period that you were at the Bridgehead, after having come up there when first given the fire sector commander role, during that entire period before Richard Welch came, did you learn that fire had penetrated into flats above the 4th floor?
I never had any confirmation regarding where fires were located in the building. I never had any indication at all at any point.
Did you discover how high in the building the smoke had reached?
I hadn't had that information back. I'd asked for it. I didn't get back to get the answer.
Did you ever discover the smoke conditions in the lobbies?
No.
Did you think that was ever part of your responsibility?
I'd asked the questions. I didn't get a chance to get the answers.
Right, because Richard Welch took over from you?
Because I was no longer in that role. I was on the balcony organising the BA logistics to make sure we didn't run out of BA, we didn't run out of equipment.
Right. Let's turn then to the handover to Richard Welch. Can you remember, first of all, what time Group Manager Welch appeared at the 2nd floor Bridgehead?
I haven't got a clue. It would be about, because I spent seconds with the watch manager on the balcony, probably about a minute with Ryan O'Keefe, probably about the same time with Louisa De Silva. I would guess that it would be within 5 minutes of me going up the staircase to take over.
Did you hear a radio message on your fireground radio, or even your airwave radio for that matter, that Richard Welch had taken over as incident commander?
I can't remember that message.
You can't. Do you remember the declaration of a major incident?
I can't remember that being declared over fireground radio.
Okay. When you first saw Richard Welch at the 2nd floor Bridgehead, did he come up to you?
We met on the corridor going in different directions, and so it was on the 2nd floor, on the corridor, adjacent to the staircase.
Right. Did you give him a handover at that point?
Yep. And as I summarise what I've just talked about, I told him there's a watch manager running BA that I don't know, but he seems to have a good grip of it. I don't know his name. He's got an Irish accent. There's a watch manager running fib boards with FSG information on. Her name is Louisa De Silva. I've been on jobs with her in the past. She did a good job. And that's where I think I said she needs some crew managers to assist her, but I can't be 100% on that. I said, I've asked for what we've talked about from Brian O'Keefe. I've said it again. I've told him I'll be coming back to him in a couple of minutes. I'm going to the balcony to get the balcony sorted out. As I was saying that, I'd been asked for the chinograph and the key points were being written on the wall. And then Richard Welch said, the reason I mentioned the IC tabard, it's really unusual to have an IC tabard on a Bridgehead, and I've explained why I had it on, and it was a conscious decision. And so one of the first things he asked me was, are you in charge? And I explained why I was still in that tabard, and he said, well, I'm taking over Fire Sector Commander. So as he said that, I peeled it off and I literally threw it in the corner because I wasn't going to need it anymore. No. And so we had that exchange. He recorded the information, and then he said, right, I'm taking over as Fire Sector Commander. I'm going to make you BA Logistics Officer. I want you to sort that balcony out. I want to not run out of BA, and I do not want to run out of any equipment. Go and make that happen.
Right. During that exchange, did you tell Richard Welch that Andy O'Loughlin had taken over as Incident Commander?
I didn't tell him, I assumed that he would have been tasked by Andy O'Loughlin. I didn't know how he'd arrived or anything like that. My assumption was he was one of the GMs that had arrived. The Incident Commander, who I knew was Andy O'Loughlin, had given him a task, which was to relieve me, which is the normal process. If a more senior officer is available and the circumstances of the incident make it appropriate, the senior officer takes over in the different command roles.
Did you know that he, Richard Welch, had taken or thought he'd taken, incident command from Brett Loft as station manager, who he thought was incident commander?
I had no knowledge of that.
Right. During your discussion, I won't call it a handover, but your discussion with Richard Welch at the Bridgehead, did you have a discussion with him about re-entry of fire into the building?
I'd prefer to call it a handover because it was, and I didn't have a discussion in so much as where I thought it may or may not be. I didn't guess about re-entering. I said one of the tasks is to get BA to this face to confirm if the fire is getting back in, and if it is, to confirm whether we can hold it and what we need to be able to do that. Now,
just going back to your second statement, if we can, at paragraphs 43 and 44 on page 11, you say in two places, you discuss in two places the likelihood that the building design principle for the high-rise had failed. First of all, you say that in the middle of paragraph 43. Can I show you that? You say, and this is, I think in connection with your handover from Mike Dowden, you say it made me draw the conclusion that it was likely that the building design principle for high-rise premises had failed, and conditions within the building's escape routes were compromised and likely not to be possible without BA. Failure of this stay-put building design principle could also indicate that the fire, as well as smoke, may be spreading to multiple compartments and levels if it had entered the building interior. I feared this apparent smoke spread throughout the building meant that compartmentation and separation was breached. And then go on to paragraph 44, you say, in the middle of that, well, picking it up in the middle of the paragraph, the system protecting the lobbies and staircases had failed. We had multiple reports throughout the building that people were trapped and required rescue, and this indicated the compartmentation and separation within the building had probably failed, causing the lobbies on various levels to be impassable. There was a rapidly spreading fire in the exterior fabric of the building on the east face, and it was possible this fire was penetrating back into the building on upper floors through the windows. I didn't know if the compartmentation within the building was intact and able to check any subsequent interior spread, allowing us to get BA crews in place to effect rescues and fight the fire simultaneously. Now, I've shown you a lot of that, because my question is this. At the point at which you see Richard Welch at the Bridgehead and have the discussion with him, did you tell him your thoughts about the likelihood that the building design principle for high-rise had failed, and I'm summarising, that it was possible that the fire was penetrating back into the building?
I can't remember the exact wording, but it was obvious that we'd got multiple FSGs. I told him what I was trying to confirm, one way or the other. In effect, my assumption, and I believe everybody's assumption on the fire ground, was that that is what had happened. I was trying to get it confirmed to make sure that everything we were doing based on assumption was reasonable and was necessary. And it was. And that's the answer.
Looking back on it, we've got to the point where you call it a handover with Richard Welch at the Bridgehead. Looking back on your time on the incident ground up to that point, at what point do you think you'd come to the conclusion that the building design principle for high-rise premises had failed in relation to this building, and that it was possible or even likely that the fire was penetrating back into the building?
When I put my foot on the bottom step of the stairs after I'd had the report back from Mike, the smoke extraction had failed.
At that point?
With everything else I'd seen, smelt, heard, all the information I'd gathered, the confirmation that that system had failed, the lifts had failed, I could see the fire was spreading up the outside of the building in a way it should be impossible for it to do so. I had got that in my head at that point. I had some really earthy language about what that building was at that point. I know it went through my mind. The best way I can put it is, this building is compromised completely. I cannot rely on anything.
Did you then have a discussion with Group Manager Welch about how you were going to deploy crews in order to assist occupants to evacuate from the building?
I didn't have it with with Group Manager Welch. I had it with Brian O'Keefe about what was his priorities, and his priorities were we're getting BA to every FSG.
Right.
So I knew that was what was happening, and that was part of my briefing. At the moment, we've got everybody arriving rigging in BA. I knew that from the briefing I'd gathered from Mike Dowden. They're coming in, we're holding them on the balcony, they're getting called in when they're needed, and they're getting briefed to go to every FSG. And that was what was happening on that bridge.
Right. To the best of your recollection, on what you saw, was there any system for prioritising among the FSG calls, particular FSG calls?
I never saw a system for that. When I was taking over that role, when I was getting my situational awareness as Fire Sector Commander, again, going back to the questions I was asking, that was about identifying who was at most risk. And those would have been the priorities. I wouldn't have been prioritising about the numbers, the age, the mobility, anything like that. I would have been looking at who is at most risk of this fire getting to them first. And they would have been the priorities. And then those other factors would have come in as secondary factors to move people in that prioritisation.
Right, and how would you... sorry, let me try this. Did you have a discussion with Group Manager Welch about how you would go about getting information, accurate, reliable information, as to which FSG callers were the ones most acutely affected by fire or smoke?
We never had that conversation, but the FSG process is that Fire Control ask those questions and they gather that information and they send it to the incident ground. So details about how many, their condition, their age, the conditions they're in is all part of that information gathering process, and that's what comes to us on the control information forms, and that's what should be being used to inform the Bridgehead, and that's what's used by the BA coordinator to prioritise where they're sending people.
During the period that you were Fire Sector Commander, did you ever consider the possibility that it would be impossible to extinguish the fire within the building?
No. We were going to rescue everybody and we were going to put the fire out.
Right. Did you consider the...
You okay? Do you want to
I am fine. I'm fine.
Okay.
During the period that you were Fire Sector Commander, Mr. Walton, did you consider whether it would be preferable to focus your resources on firefighting as a priority or on rescue as a priority?
We had to do simultaneous action. If we could stop the fire getting back in, then there were no rescues that needed doing. It would be a case of clear the staircases and people can walk out tomorrow.
Right.
So firefighting was a priority. The likelihood and probably the truth of the situation, which hadn't been confirmed yet, was that the fire was probably back in which case we needed to rescue. So we needed to carry out both until we had a confirmation one way or the other as to what should be the priority. So we were in a catch-22. There was no escape route for the people to use themselves. They had to be rescued, and we had to try and maintain that pathway for us to carry out those rescues, let alone those people to try and use it themselves. So that meant the firefighting was essential.
Yes, Mr. Walton, thank you very much. Those are all the questions I have for you at the moment. There may be one or two which, after a short break, I might feel I have to ask, but I hope not. So, Mr. Chairman, might that be a convenient moment for a
Yes, of course.
short break?
Mr. Walton, it sometimes happens that after a mature reflection, Council finds there are other questions that need to be asked. So I'm going to rise for 5 minutes. Will that be long enough, do you think?
I hope so. Let's go with 5 minutes. If I need a little longer, I'll get
Yes.
I'll get a runner to send a message back to you.
Good idea.
Crew manager.
And that will give Mr. Millett a chance to consider his position, and then we'll get you back and see if there are more questions.
Okay, thank
All right,
you.
so no talking to anyone about your evidence for the time being. I'd like to go with the usher and she'll look after you.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks so much. Right, well, I'll say 4:30,
Yes.
or when you send the actual form me to say that you're ready?
Whichever is the earlier. Later.
I think later. Yes. Well, Mr. Millett, I assume a few more questions.
Just a few, Mr. Chairman, yes.
Could you ask Mr. Walton to come back, please? Thank you, Mr. Walton. I think a few more questions.
Mr. Walton, thank you for coming back to me. First of all, there was a reference in a document I wanted to show you earlier, and I didn't find it properly. Can I please ask for it to be shown? It's IWS 50169 at page 91. IWS 50169 at page 91. Now, you won't have seen this document before. It's an email from Peter Madison at KCTMO to a number of people at RBKC and indeed others, and complaints at KCTMO as well, and also copied, in fact two, a gentleman called Edward Daffan, who is a resident, and it's addressed to Mr. Daffan. And it says, "Dear Mr. Daffan, thank you for your message. I would respond to the issues you raise as follows." And if you can have that scrolled down to the foot of that page where the title to the paragraphs is Activation of the Automatic Opening Vents, AOV. And it says, "The automatic opening vents are designed to disperse smoke in the event of a fire. The old system was beyond repair, and the new system, serving floors 5 and above, was commissioned in January 2016. Then it says this, the system does not automatically contact the fire brigade when activated, as the brigade does not provide a response in such circumstances." And then it goes on to discuss a phone connection. And then it says this, "The fire brigade are aware that the system is not yet fully automated and have confirmed that they are comfortable with the way that the system currently operates." Now, that is what was being said in this email, and I should just have indicated that the date of this email, if you go to the top, is 18th of April 2016, so 10 days before your visit. My question is, were you aware, either at the time of your visit or after that, that, as is said here, the fire brigade have confirmed that they are comfortable with the way the system currently operates?
I had no knowledge of that.
Right. Next question, still on the subject of the ventilation system, and you described quite graphically for us not very long ago in your evidence about the moment you took the first step on the stairs, that's when you realised the building failed, and one of the contributing factors was that the smoke extraction system wasn't working. If the smoke extraction system had been working, do you think that would have assisted self-evacuation by residents and assisted firefighters in effecting evacuations, from what you knew of it?
It was designed to do that on the floor that activated, so I would expect it to.
Right. Now, I want to ask you just a number of questions about a specific floor and flat. But before I do that, can I just ask you in general terms, do you have any recollection from the night of any particular rescues, particular flats, particular floors?
No, when I went to the balcony, fairly soon after that I carried a casualty from the building. On my way back into the building, I realised that the only way in and out the building was going to get compromised by the falling debris. So I then took over the role of using police riot shields over our heads to be able to access and egress the building. So I stayed in the lobby and managed that, and stayed in that role for the next 6 hours, something like that. And so I never was involved in actually engaging with any of the rescues. Were you aware, or did you become aware during the night, that there was an occupant of the tower on the 22nd floor, flat 193, as it turns out, who came down and escaped without breathing equipment
all without PPE, just after 3 a.m.
I would have been in that lobby role at that time, and I've got no recollection of anybody coming out when I was in that lobby role without the assistance of fire service. So I wasn't aware of that, no.
On the basis that that is what happened, how are you able to explain that a survivor could come down in those conditions, but crews can't go up?
I can't explain that. I never saw it, so I can't explain that.
Were you aware, or did you become aware, that occupants of the building had phoned for help and that 2 hours into the fire they still hadn't been rescued? I
was aware that FSGs were going on well into the incident, so but by extrapolating that, yes, I was aware that there were people who were still in FSG situations well into the fire. Did there come a time when you became aware that firefighters were struggling to get above the 15th floor? I can't remember being told that, but because of the way we were in, I was involved in the implementation of additional fire mains, that type of thing. It was obvious that we were having difficulties, and the way I was being asked to supply additional EDBA and SDBA wearers throughout the night.
Now, we discussed earlier in your evidence the deployment of EDBA, whereas the line crew to go to the roof. What eventually happened to that idea?
I never heard anything more about that. I don't know if it was achieved or, you know, if I'm talking from my knowledge, I had no knowledge of that being achieved. From what I've seen elsewhere in the inquiry, I know it didn't happen. Right.
Did you ever discuss with Richard Welch, when he came to the Bridgehead and you started talking about getting people out of the building, to put it loosely, did you talk about a strategy whereby you'd work from the top down or from the bottom up?
No, we prioritised the people at most risk. So that would have been what we talked about. I was telling him how we were going to identify who was at most risk with the questions that I'd asked. Right. And then he would decide on what the priority was for rescue on that information.
Did he ever discuss with you a strategy whereby you would do floor sweeps and work your way up the building?
When I was on the BA lobby sector, so I was on the balcony on the second floor, controlling BA resources there, the message came back to me to brief the crews that were waiting on the landing that in order to be able to reduce the travel distance, as we gain control of the fire situation on the floor, we would advance the Bridgehead with the idea that we would systematically put the fire out on the floor above, move and take that ground, and we would advance up the building. So I was to warn crews that although they may have dispatched from, say, the second floor as the Bridgehead, when they returned, the Bridgehead may be on the third floor, it may be on the fourth floor, so make sure you're aware of that situation. And if you come back to where you think the Bridgehead is, that could be the reason why. And that was literally the type of briefing part of the briefing I was giving to BA crews while they were waiting.
Right, and you say, is that when you were on the BA lobby
BA
sector?
Logistics is the title that Richard Welch gave it. So I was on the balcony and I was making sure that the crews that assembled there had the minimum level of equipment that I wanted them to have as a BA team, that they knew where the additional equipment was and that they were fully switched on to the conditions they were going into. I remember briefing crews on that balcony that this was a really serious fire. The only way anyone's going to come out of this building is if you bring them out. Only you know the conditions that you're working in. Make sure that you don't die trying to do the impossible, but don't do it lightly, because the only way they're coming out is if you get them.
And just to be clear in terms of timing, that was when the Bridgehead was still on the second floor?
Yeah.
Or had it moved to the third floor?
I was probably on that Bridgehead on that area for about 10, maybe 15 minutes before a spate of casualties arrived, and the available firefighters without breathing apparatus on, who were being used as casualty carriers, were exhausted. They were used taking casualties out. So I had to take a casualty from the building. On my return was where I realised the exterior had compromised the main, or the only, way in and out of the building, and I improvised using shields.
Mr. Walton, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I have no further questions for you. I just want to say thank you to you for coming here today and assisting us with our investigations. We're very grateful to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, and I add my thanks to that, Mr. Walton. It's been a long day for you, and I know that from time to time it's been quite distressing. But I'd like you to know that your evidence is very helpful to us. And so we're very grateful to you for coming along to give it. But now it's over, you're free to go.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much indeed. Yes, Mr. Billett.
Well, Mr. Chairman, that concludes the evidence for today. I'm grateful to you, Mr. Chairman, for sitting a little bit later than we otherwise would normally. But we start again, if we may,
Monday?
10 o'clock Monday morning
Yes.
with DAC O'Loughlin, I hope.
Well, thank you all very much. Yes, well, we break now and resume at 10 o'clock on Monday morning.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.